this kind of interesting thing about California. And I want to just talk about a little story in California, and it may have bigger play as we move forward in this election cycle. But I think the Trump administration should take great advantage of this. In the state of California, which I mentioned earlier, is run by the Democrats. Every level of government, the governor, the majority in the Senate, the California Senate, the California House, most of the districts in California, most of the county government, just Democrat run to beat the band. And all they ever do is raise taxes and make more rules and make more laws. Well, those of you who use Uber or the other similar service, Lyft, those two services, if you don't know, I'll tell you very quickly, it's an app on your phone. So when you go to use Uber or Lyft, you press on the app, you say, I am here at this place. You tell them where you want to go. You have to have an account. You have an account on their phone. They have your credit card number. So you say onto your app, I'm here. I want to go there. They have a massive system. They send a driver to pick you up. And that person picks you up and then he takes you to your location. You get out. No credit card. No money changes hands. Off you go. Everyone loves Uber and Lyft because they are modern conveniences. And many drivers, when you take those two, Uber or Lyft, will be people who tell you things like, yeah, my day job, I'm a security guard at the mall, or I have some other job. These people are doing Uber or Lyft as time permits in their schedules, often as second jobs, and people love the convenience. And on a recent trip my husband and I were on, we went from, I forgot which way it was, but we went from the airport to the hotel via taxi, and then from the hotel back to the airport via Uber, or whichever way it was. The point is, Uber was about half as expensive, or Uber was cheaper, to be clear, cost us half as much as the taxi cost us. And that is because taxi drivers and taxi companies are businesses regulated by the government as employers. And so taxi companies have to pay their employees whatever the prevailing wage is, whatever the minimum wage is where they are. And on top of that, they have to pay all of the things that the federal and state governments require employers to do. So they collect for unemployment insurance, they collect for workers' comp, they collect taxes. I mean, it's an employment as a taxi driver like any other job in America. Well, many people have figured out Uber is, and we happen to use Uber, but I think Lyft's about the same. It's cheaper, it's faster, it's more efficient, and frankly, the drivers are usually really friendly. And if you feel like having a conversation, they're happy to talk to you. It's it's a fun thing. So in California, the socialist Democrats who run that state, and yes, I know they're really just Democrats, but they have this socialist mindset. The California Democrats passed a bill, went into effect in January, was AB 5, Assembly Bill 5. And basically, what California is trying to do under this law is force Uber and other companies like them to fall under the laws that apply to employers. So they're trying to, because Uber, the relationship between a driver who drives around in an Uber and the company Uber is an independent contractor. I mean, Uber doesn't care when you come to work. Uber can say, you just, when you want to go on duty, you go on, you drive your Uber, you turn your app on, you go pick people up, drive them off. That's what you do. And so Uber has been free of the obligations and the expenses that attach to taxi companies that are employers. So California passes AB 5, basically says to Uber and Lyft, we're going to force you to actually be a employer, force Uber to be an employer, force the employees, the drivers, to be employees of Uber, and attach all of the extremely obnoxious and expensive regulation and cost that attaches to employers to what was previously, and people use the expression, a gig economy. Just basically, you drive Uber when you feel like it. You got to, like people say, they got a gig to sing somewhere. Well, you got a gig to be an Uber driver. So today, it's my gig. I'm a driver. Okay. So California, run by Democrats, forced this AB 5 through, and they now have, this is in place. And so all the legal squirming. By the way, this is my area of law by way of background. Before I had a much more fun job of doing this show, I used to be a labor lawyer in California, and I represented businesses in a dispute with the state of California about whether or not their people they work for them could be considered independent contractors, and there's a series of criteria in the law that you have to apply, or are they have to be employees and you're required to pay all the benefits and follow the regulations that attach to employment. So back to this story, Uber and Lyft are not happy in California. This is the California legislature butting in on a successful business. And this is the point I want to make, though, about politics. On whose behalf were the Democrat legislators in California acting when they passed AB 5? Whose interests were they looking out for? Because it's not the interests of the companies, Uber and Lyft. Those companies, they don't want to be employers. They don't want to employ the drivers. So they weren't looking out for the business community, the Uber and Lyft companies. They weren't looking out for the drivers. The drivers for Uber and Lyft, they don't want to be employees. They like the freedom of what they do. They like the idea that they can decide when they'll drive, they can have all this freedom, and they like the basically direct pay setup they have with Uber and Lyft. They don't want to have the state government and the federal government getting their greedy little hands into the money they're making and do all the things that government does, attaches expenses to their income. And third, those legislators in California were not acting on behalf of the customers. The customers, the people who use Uber and Lyft, they didn't want California to pass AB 5 either. So the legislators are not looking out. The Democrat, and I'm telling you folks, it's a socialist mindset. They're not looking out for Uber and Lyft. They're not looking out for the drivers. They're not looking out for the customers. Everybody in that world wants to be left alone. The California legislators, who they're looking out for, number one, you could also call this bill the Taxi Driver Full Employment Act, because they're trying to help the taxi drivers who complain to the legislature, dang, how come these people over here, they don't have to follow our regulations because they're functioning independent contractors, why do we have to? And the answer of a legislator should be to the taxi drivers, then go drive an Uber. Go drive Uber. Why do you have to why do you have to work for the taxi company? There's a freedom answer a legislator can give to the taxi people complaining about this. And the legislators are simply looking for more ways to get more tax dollars into their revenues and more control over people who like freedom. I have to tell you, this happened in Texas. We had just the left wing center of Texas is in Austin, our capital, very left wing. They're always following left wing idiotic things. And they did this 2 years ago, I think it was, that the city of Austin got complaints, same kind of complaints from taxi drivers. Hey, how come Uber and Lyft are, allowed to do this and we have to be employees? And the way that the Austin City Council, what they passed, they just simply banned Uber and Lyft. They didn't name them by name, but they banned that kind of business practice. And so college kids at UT Austin, an enormous campus, who are used to Uber, love Uber, had Uber go away. I was down there on a business trip, or actually some political trip, and wanted to get an Uber from the hotel to wherever I was going, and I realized, oh yeah, they don't have Uber here anymore. Now, I think maybe Austin fixed that. I meant to look that up before I came here. I think Austin maybe retracted that. I'm not sure. But the point is, in this large election cycle of 2020, what sways voters are things that actually touch them personally. I can go on and on all day about the beauty of free markets and the evil of socialism and all these theoretical ideas, but the common sense on your doorstep, in your wallet, in your life things that big government leftists do are the kinds of things that help wake people up. Now, I'm not going to go out on a limb here and say that California is going to go Trump. I realize that would be, a bridge too far. But I will say it's a great example of the kind of thing left-wingers in government do. They really don't care about the interests of the people. They don't care about the customers, the drivers, or the companies. They don't care about the welfare of the business. They don't care about keeping people happy. They care about control. They care about collecting taxes. They care about protecting union workers and unionized people and unions that donate money to them. That's who left-wingers care about. So this issue is really brewing in California. One of the legislators who was the one who pushed this bill. I don't have the clip for you, but she pushed this bill through, and she went to some rally where someone was yelling at her and complaining about it and, making a pretty big stink about it. And she ended up using bad words. I'll just say using potty mouth words, yelling at a California citizen who was protesting, "Why can't you just leave us alone? Let us have our Uber and Lyft." She could not stand to humor them, because the last thing leftists want to hear is what the American people actually think about anything.